High Commander Cirith stood on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest and watched her armada spread across the darkness of space like a tide of death. 40,000 warships hung in formation around the tiny yellow star that humans called Solshi. Had commanded fleets for 200 years and had crushed rebellions on 30 worlds and had never once felt doubt before a battle. Today would be no different. The Dominion of Vethkai had ruled the Orion Spur for 6,000 years, and in all that time no species had ever refused their terms and survived. The humans were young and foolish, and barely 3 centuries into space travel. They had built a handful of orbital platforms around their homeworld, and called it defense. Cirith had seen their ships and had laughed at the crude metal boxes they flew through the void. This conquest would take hours. Send the transmission, she ordered. Her communications officer obeyed, and the ultimatum went out to every human receiver in the system. Submit to Dominion rule or face complete annihilation. There would be no negotiation and no mercy, and no second chances. The Dominion had offered partnership once, and the humans had refused, and now they would learn the cost of pride. Cirith expected begging or threats or perhaps silence as the humans scrambled to prepare their pathetic defenses. Instead, a single transmission came back within minutes. A human woman appeared on the view screen, and she wore a simple uniform with no decorations except a name tag that read Admiral Chen Wei-Lin. She was old for a human with gray hair and lines on her face, but her eyes were steady and cold. "We decline," she said. That was all. The transmission ended. Cirith stared at the empty screen for a long moment, and then she began to laugh. Her officers joined her, because what else could they do when faced with such magnificent stupidity? "All ships," Cirith commanded when her laughter faded. "Open fire." The plasma lances of the Dominion fleet had shattered 100 civilizations and had burned worlds clean of life and had ended wars. Before they began, 10,000 beams of blue-white fire streaked toward Earth and struck the orbital platforms that humans had built with such desperate hope. The shields on those platforms held for 11 seconds. Cirith counted each one and watched the energy readings climb as human technology strained against the inevitable. Then the shields collapsed and the platforms exploded and debris scattered across Earth's orbit like glittering confetti. "Targets destroyed," her tactical officer reported. "Human orbital defense is eliminated." Cirith nodded and prepared to give the order for ground invasion when something on her sensor display made her pause. Ships were rising from Earth's surface, not dozens but thousands. They came up through the atmosphere in waves, and they were ugly and angular and looked like they had been welded together from scraps. Some of them were leaking atmosphere, and others had mismatched engines, and a few seemed to be held together by nothing but hope and spite. They should not have been able to fly. They flew anyway. "Commander," her tactical officer said with confusion in his voice, "we are detecting approximately 4,000 human vessels on approach." 4,000. Cirith repeated. She had expected a few hundred at most. Where had they hidden so many ships, and how had they built them without the Dominion knowing? "They are on direct intercept course," the officer continued. "They are not attempting evasive maneuvers." Cirith watched the human fleet advance, and she felt something stir in her chest that she had not felt in 2 centuries of command. The humans knew what they were flying into. They had watched their orbital platforms die in seconds, and they understood that their crude ships stood no chance against Dominion weapons, and still they came. "All ships," Cirith ordered, "engage the enemy fleet." The battle began, and it was not a battle at all, but a slaughtered Dominion. Plasma lances tore through human hulls like claws through paper, and human ships exploded by the dozens with each volley. The humans fired back with primitive kinetic weapons and weak energy beams that barely scorched Dominion shields in the first 10 minutes. The Dominion destroyed 300 human vessels and lost nothing, but the humans did not retreat. More ships kept rising from Earth, and they flew straight into the killing field, and they died and were replaced by more. Sirith watched a human destroyer take 4 direct hits and lose half its hull and still keep coming until it crashed into a Dominion frigate and detonated its reactor. Both ships died together, Commander. Our tactical officer said with something new in his voice. Human vessel approaching on ramming trajectory. Sirith saw it on the screen, and it was a tiny transport ship with no weapons at all, and it was accelerating directly toward the Eternal Conquest. Destroy it. She ordered her gunners fired, and the transport exploded 1,000 kilometers away. But another was already coming, and another and another. The humans were throwing themselves at her fleet like waves against rocks, and yes, the waves were breaking, but the water never stopped. Commander. A communications officer interrupted. We are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Display it. Admiral Chun appeared on the screen again, and behind her, Sirith could see the chaos of a command center under fire. You have superior numbers, Chun said. You have superior technology, and superior experience, and superior everything. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. But you have to win, Chun continued. We just have to make you bleed for every inch until you decide we are not worth the cost. The transmission ended. Sirith stood in silence and watched more human ships die and watched more human ships rise to replace them. She had conquered 30 worlds and had crushed 100 rebellions and had never once questioned. That victory was certain. For the first time in 200 years, High Commander Sirith felt the cold touch of uncertainty. The humans could not win. She knew this with absolute certainty. But watching them advance into certain death with their eyes open and their weapons firing, she wondered if perhaps winning and losing meant something different to these strange creatures. The battle raged on, and the humans kept coming. They kept coming. Archivist Kelvin had been assigned to the fleet to document another routine conquest. He was a historian and a scholar, and he had recorded the fall of 17 civilizations with careful precision. His job was to watch and to write and to create a record that future generations would study. The war against humanity was supposed to be simple. It was supposed to be over in days. 3 weeks later, Kelvin sat in his quarters aboard the Eternal Conquest and stared at numbers that made no sense. The Dominion had destroyed over 2,000 human ships. They had killed millions of human soldiers and sailors. They had bombed human cities and shattered human industry. By every measure, the humans had lost, and yet the war continued. Kelvin pulled up his tactical display and watched the latest battle unfold near the orbit of Earth's moon. Dominion cruiser was engaging a group of human frigates, and the outcome was obvious from the start. The cruiser was 10 times their size with shields that could withstand nuclear weapons and plasma lances that could cut through mountains. The human frigates were metal coffins with engines attached. The cruiser fired and 2 frigates exploded, and the others scattered but did not flee. Instead, they came around for another pass and fired everything they had at the cruiser's engines. Most of their shots missed or bounced off the shields, but one torpedo found a gap in the shield coverage and struck the engine housing, and the cruiser shuddered. The damage was minor and would be repaired in hours, but the damage was real. The surviving frigates died moments later, but they died having hurt a ship that should have been untouchable. Kelvin added the engagement to his records and noted that the Dominion had now lost 212 ships since the war began. 212 ships lost to a species that had been traveling between stars for barely 3 centuries. It was impossible, and yet the numbers did not lie. He spent the next several hours reviewing captured human transmissions, trying to understand how they thought. What he found disturbed him deeply. The humans knew they were losing. They had done the calculations, just as Kelvin had done, and they understood that their fleet was being destroyed faster than they could build replacements. They knew that at the current rate of attrition, their entire military would be eliminated within 2 months, and they were fighting anyway. Kelvin found a transmission between 2 human officers discussing casualties, and what struck him was not the grief in their voices, but the acceptance. We always knew this was a one-way trip. One officer said, "We are not fighting to win today because we cannot win today. Then why fight at all?" The other asked, "Because every ship we lose is a ship they have to spend ammunition on, and every day we hold is a day our children have to prepare, and every drop of blood we spill is a message to anyone watching that humanity does not kneel." Kelvin paused the transmission and sat back in his chair. He had studied 100 conquered species, and none of them had thought this way. Most species fought until victory became impossible, and then they surrendered to preserve what remained. The humans were not fighting for victory. They were fighting to make the Dominion pay such a terrible price that future conquests would think twice before attacking Earth. They were sacrificing themselves for humans who had not even been born yet. Kelvin searched the human historical archives that Dominion intelligence had captured, and he found that this was not new behavior. Humans had done this before. They had a battle called Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held a pass against an army of hundreds of thousands, knowing they would die, but fighting anyway. They had a siege called Stalingrad, where millions died in frozen rubble rather than surrender a single city. They had a word for it in almost every human language: sacrifice. To give something precious away so that others might benefit. Kelvin had always thought of sacrifice as a transaction where you gave something to receive something else, but the humans treated sacrifice as a weapon. They threw their lives at the Dominion like stones at a giant, and yes, the giant barely felt each stone, but the stones never stopped. A priority alert flashed across Kelvin's screen, and he switched to the tactical feed. A human pilot had just rammed his damaged fighter directly into the engine core of a Kohler Dominion destroyer. The destroyer was crippled and would need months of repair. The pilot was dead, but before impact, he had transmitted 2 words to every ship in the human fleet: "Worth it." Kelvin stared at those words for a long time. Worth it. A life traded for an engine. A soul exchanged for a delay. The mathematics made no sense because humans did not calculate value the way the Dominion did. To humans, some things were beyond price. Freedom was beyond price. Defiance was beyond price. The right to choose how you died was beyond price. Kelvin began to write a new report, and this one was not a simple record of conquest. It was a warning. The humans cannot be measured by our standards. He wrote, "They do not fight to win because they know they cannot win, and yet they fight harder than any species we have ever faced." He paused and considered his next words carefully. "I do not believe they can be conquered in any meaningful sense because conquest requires breaking the enemy's will, and I do not believe their will can be broken." He sent the report to High Commander Sirith. She did not respond. The war continued. General Vorath had conquered 11 worlds for the Dominion. He had led armies of millions and had crushed rebellions that lasted decades and had never once failed to achieve his objectives. When High Command ordered him to land on Earth and end the war quickly, he accepted the mission with confidence. His shock troops were the finest soldiers in the Commissity Dominion, and each one was worth 50 human warriors in direct combat. They were taller and stronger and faster, and their armor could stop human bullets, and their weapons could vaporize human bodies. The landing would be simple. The conquest would be swift. The humans would break. 3 weeks later, Vorath sat in a bombed-out building in what had once been a human city called Moscow, and wondered how everything had gone so wrong. His army had landed with 2 million soldiers and overwhelming air support. They had expected to face human military formations that they could identify and target and destroy. Instead, they found nothing. The humans had abandoned their defensive positions and melted into the cities and forests and mountains. And then the dying had begun. Vorath's soldiers would secure a city block and declare it safe, and then explosions would tear through their formations from buildings they had already cleared. His convoys would travel down empty roads and suddenly find themselves under fire from enemies that vanished before reinforcements could arrive. His officers would establish command posts, and human infiltrators would somehow bypass every security measure and detonate themselves in the middle of staff meetings. The humans did not fight like soldiers. They fought like ghosts. Vorath had captured a human fighter 2 days ago and had interrogated him, expecting to find a trained commando or special forces operative. Instead, he found a schoolteacher. The man had been 50 years old, with gray hair and soft hands, and he had walked into a Dominion checkpoint with explosives strapped to his chest and had killed 11 soldiers before the guards shot him down. A schoolteacher. Vorath had asked the captured humans why civilians were fighting, and they had looked at him with confusion, as if he had asked why water was wet. There are no civilians. One prisoner told him, there are only humans who have not picked up weapons yet. This was not war as Vorath understood it. This was something else. This was an entire species that had decided death was preferable to surrender. The humans used their own cities as weapons and collapsed buildings onto advancing troops and flooded tunnels with poison gas and turned every street corner into a kill zone. They used their children as scouts and messengers, and sometimes as bombs. They used their elderly as spies who watched and reported, and then swallowed poison when they were discovered. They used their wounded as bait, and would place injured soldiers in the open and wait for Dominion medics to approach before triggering hidden explosives. Vorath had fought 30 campaigns and had never seen anything like this. His army had killed hundreds of thousands of humans and had lost 40,000 soldiers in return. 40,000 of the Dominion's finest warriors dead in 3 weeks. It was unthinkable. It was impossible. It was happening. Vorath opened a communication channel to High Commander Cirith aboard the Eternal Conquest. Commander, he said, I must report on the ground situation. Go ahead, General. We control approximately 30% of the major population centers, and we have eliminated significant enemy military assets, and by traditional measures, we are winning. I sense a qualification coming. Cirith said. Vorath closed his eyes for a moment. They will not break, he said. I have burned their cities and killed their families and destroyed everything they built, and they will not break. Perhaps you need to apply more pressure. Commander, I have applied every form of pressure available to me, and each time I increase the violence, they match it and exceed it. He told her about the schoolteacher and the children and the wounded used as traps. Yesterday, we captured a hospital. Vorath continued. The staff had evacuated most patients, but some were too injured to move, and we thought we had taken prisoners. He paused because even now the memory made his stomach turn. They had rigged the entire building with explosives. And when we entered, they detonated it, and 300 of my soldiers died along with everyone inside. Cirith was silent. They killed their own wounded rather than let us capture them. Vorath said. They chose death for themselves and their patients rather than give us a victory, and they smiled as they pushed the button. More silence. Commander, I am requesting immediate extraction for all ground forces. You are asking me to retreat. I am asking you to recognize that this world cannot be conquered, because conquest means nothing to people who would rather die than submit. Vorath looked out the window at the burning city. Somewhere in the ruins, humans were watching and waiting and preparing the next attack. I have fought 30 campaigns, he said. I have broken armies and toppled governments and crushed resistance movements that lasted generations. He turned back to the screen. These humans will not break, because I do not think they can break, and we can kill them all, but we cannot make them kneel. Cirith stared at him for a long moment. I will consider your request, she said. The communication ended. Vorath sat alone in the darkness and listened to the distant sounds of battle and waited for orders that he already knew would come too late. Outside the window, a human child ran through the rubble carrying a message to fighters hiding in the ruins. The child could not have been more than 10 years old. Vorath watched her disappear into the shadows and felt something he had never felt before in 30 campaigns. He felt afraid. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin sat in a bunker 3 kilometers beneath the Himalayan mountains and watched her world burn. The screens around her showed feeds from across the globe, and none of them showed anything good. 60% of major cities destroyed, 3 billion people dead, the human fleet reduced to less than 1,000 operational vessels. By any rational measure, humanity had lost the war, and yet here she sat still, breathing, still fighting, still commanding what remained of Earth's defense. A young officer approached her console. "Admiral, we have confirmed reports of Dominion forces withdrawing from the Asian theater." Chun nodded but did not feel relief. "They will be back," she said. "They are regrouping, not retreating." "Yes, Admiral, but for now the pressure is reduced and our forces can resupply." Chun looked at the young man and saw the exhaustion in his eyes and the hope he was trying so hard to maintain. "What is your name, Lieutenant?" "Park, Admiral, and Lieutenant Park, Jinho." "Do you have family, Lieutenant Park?" His face tightened. "I had a sister in Seoul, Admiral." At past tense, Chun reached out and touched his shoulder. "I am sorry." "She was a nurse," Park said. "When the Dominion landed, she refused to evacuate the hospital, and she stayed with her patients until the end." His voice cracked, but he did not cry. "She sent me a message before the building came down, and she said she was proud, and she said she was not afraid." Chun had heard 1,000 stories like this in the past month, stories of ordinary people who had chosen death over surrender and had faced the end with courage that made her chest ache. A priority transmission alert flashed on her screen, and she recognized the frequency. "Dominion Command Channel. Lieutenant, please give me the room." Park saluted and withdrew. Chun activated the transmission and found herself looking at High Commander Sirith. The alien woman looked different than she had at the start of the war. There were shadows under her eyes and tension in her shoulders and something in her expression that might have been doubt. "Admiral Chun," Sirith said, "I am contacting you to discuss terms. We have already given you our terms, Commander. I am offering new terms," Sirith said. "Terms that recognize the courage your species has shown." Chun leaned back in her chair. "I am listening. Humanity will submit to Dominion oversight, but will retain internal autonomy, and you will provide military forces for Dominion operations. But your homeworld will not be occupied, and your people will not be enslaved." It was a generous offer, more generous than any species had ever received from the Dominion. In exchange, Sirith continued, "the fighting stops, and your people survive, and you keep most of what you have built." Chun considered the offer for a long moment. "Commander, may I show you something?" Sirith nodded. Chun activated a series of feeds and broadcast them to the Dominion flagship. "This is Shanghai," she said. The screen showed a city in ruins with fires burning in every direction, and Dominion troops moving through the streets. But in the rubble, there was a school, and inside children were sitting at desks learning mathematics while bombs fell outside. This is London. A church with its roof blown off, and inside a wedding was taking place with a priest reading vows while artillery shook the walls. This is Buenos Aires. A hospital where a woman was giving birth surrounded by wounded soldiers, and the doctor was smiling as he held up a crying infant. This is what you are, fighting commander. Chun switched off the feeds. You can destroy our cities and kill our armies and burn our world to ash, but you cannot kill what makes us human. Sirith stared at her. And what is that? Hope, Chun said. You cannot kill hope, and you can only make it angry. She stood and faced the screen directly. Your offer is generous, and I understand why you made it. And I know that accepting would save billions of lives. Chun shook her head. But we did not fight this war to survive as subjects, and we fought this war to remain free. And if we surrender now, then everyone who died in the last month died for nothing. You cannot win, Sirith said. No, Chun agreed. We cannot win, and we know this, and we have known this since the first day. She smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. "But we can make you bleed, and we can make you doubt, and we can make every species in your Dominion watch and wonder if maybe, just maybe, conquest is not worth the cost. You would sacrifice your entire species for that. Commander, your Dominion has ruled for 6,000 years because no one believed they could resist you, and we are teaching the galaxy that resistance is possible." Chun leaned forward. "Even if we all die today, the idea of us will live forever, and every conquered species will remember that the humans fought, and every tyrant will wonder if the next species will do the same." She straightened. "That is worth any price." Cirith was silent for a long time. "I underestimated your species," she finally said. "Everyone does." Chun replied, "It is one of our advantages." The transmission ended. Chun sat alone in the bunker and listened to the distant rumble of battle and waited for whatever came next. She was tired and afraid, and she knew that humanity might not survive the week. But she was also proud. Whatever happened next, the humans had not knelt. They had not broken, and that was something no one could ever take away. High Commander Cirith stood before the Dominion Council and faced judgment. The 12 rulers of the most powerful civilization in the galaxy stared down at her from their elevated seats, and their expressions ranged from confusion to anger to something that might have been fear. "Explain yourself, Commander." The first voice demanded. "You had 40,000 ships and 2 million soldiers, and you faced a species with inferior technology and inferior numbers, and you retreated." Cirith had prepared for this moment. "Counselors, I did not retreat because I was losing, and I retreated because winning would have cost us more than we could afford to pay." "The Dominion does not retreat," another counselor said. "We do not show weakness to lesser species." "With respect, Counselor, I was not showing weakness, and I was showing wisdom." She activated a holographic display that showed the casualty reports from the human campaign. In 6 weeks of combat, we lost 4,000 ships and 60,000 soldiers, and we destroyed approximately 70% of humanity's military capacity. Then you were winning. The first voice said, "By traditional metrics, yes, and by any rational analysis, we should have achieved complete victory within another month." Cirith paused. "But the humans do not fight rationally." She showed them the footage she had collected. The schoolteacher with explosives, the hospital that detonated itself, the children carrying messages through rubble, the wedding in a bombed church, the baby born in a dying city. "These are not soldiers," she said. "These are ordinary humans and teachers and doctors and children, and they fought with the same ferocity as their military." She turned to face the council directly. "We killed 3 billion of them, and they did not surrender, and we destroyed their cities, and they fought from the ruins, and we eliminated their fleet. And they built new ships from wreckage and launched them before the fires had cooled. All species resisted first." A counselor said dismissively, "They break eventually." "No, Counselor, and that is what I am trying to explain." Cirith took a deep breath. "I have conquered 30 worlds and crushed 100 rebellions, and I have broken species that fought for decades before submitting." She met the first voice's eyes. "The humans cannot be broken because they do not fight for victory, and they fight for something else, and something that does not disappear when you kill them. And what is that? They call it many things in freedom and defiance and hope, and but what it truly is cannot be translated into our language." She searched for the right words. "It is the belief that some things are worth any price, and that death is preferable to submission. And that even if you lose, you can still win by refusing to kneel." The council was silent. "If we continued the war, we would eventually kill every human on Earth, and we would burn their world to ash, and we would eliminate their species entirely." Cirith shook her head. "But we would spend 10,000 ships and 1,000,000 soldiers to do it, and we would be weakened for decades, and every subject species in the Dominion would see that the mighty Vethkai could bleed." She let that sink in, and they would wonder if perhaps they could make us bleed too. The first voice leaned forward. Are you saying the humans have already won? No, counselor, and I am saying that neither side won, and the humans lost their cities and their people and their future, and we lost something more dangerous. And what is that? Our reputation for invincibility. The council deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they accepted Sirith's assessment and declared the human campaign concluded and ordered no further military action against Earth. It was not a treaty, and it was not a surrender, and it was simply an acknowledgement that some wars could not be won. 10 years passed. Earth rebuilt slowly, and the scars remained visible from orbit and great wounds. In the land where cities had burned and craters where bombs had fallen, but there were also new structures rising and new shipyards, producing new vessels and new orbital stations, defending a world that had survived the impossible. Admiral Chun Wayland stood in a ceremonial hall in what had once been Geneva and waited for the Dominion delegation to arrive. She was older now, with more gray in her hair and more lines on her face, and she walked with a cane because of injuries that had never fully healed. But she was alive. Humanity was alive. The Dominion ambassador entered, and he was tall and elegant, and he moved with the careful grace of a predator, pretending to be civilized. Admiral Chun, he said, I bring greetings from the Dominion Council, Ambassador, and welcome to Earth. They sat across from each other at a table that had been salvaged from the ruins of the old United Nations building. I am here to offer friendship, the ambassador said. The Dominion wishes to establish trade relations and cultural exchange, and perhaps in time a formal alliance. Chun studied him. 10 years ago, you tried to conquer us. 10 years ago, we did not understand you, and now we do. The ambassador leaned forward. Your species taught us something we had forgotten in 6,000 years of dominance, and you taught us that some things cannot be measured, and some prices cannot be calculated, and some people cannot be conquered. He smiled, and it was almost genuine. The Council has decided that humanity is more valuable as a partner than as a subject. And you have earned this, and you have earned it with blood and sacrifice and stubborn, impossible courage. Chun looked at him for a long moment. We did not fight for your respect, Ambassador. I know, and that is why you have it. Chun stood and walked to the window. Outside she could see the city being rebuilt, and humans working alongside machines to raise new buildings from the ashes of the old. There are other species watching us, she said. Other civilizations wondering if they could do what we did. Yes. And other empires wondering if their subjects might try. Yes. Chun turned back to the ambassador. You did not come here for friendship, and you came here because you are afraid. The ambassador did not deny it. The galaxy is changing, Admiral, and the humans changed it, and you showed everyone that the powerful are not invincible, and that the weak can resist, and that courage matters more than numbers. He stood. The Dominion can adapt to this new reality as your enemy or as your friend, and we choose to be your friend. Chun considered this. We will accept your friendship, she said finally. But understand something, Ambassador. She met his eyes. We did not teach you that lesson, and you taught it to yourselves, and we just reminded you. The ambassador bowed. Perhaps that is true, Admiral, and perhaps that is what makes it so valuable. They shook hands, and somewhere in the ruins of old Earth, a child looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. The war was over, humanity had survived, and the galaxy would never forget the species that had faced certain destruction with defiance in their hearts and fire in their eyes, and had refused to kneel even when the shields failed and the armies broke. The humans had advanced, and they would never stop.